Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, I am going to be running down my cube review for Brilliant Stars. As you guys probably know already, if you've been watching the channel for a while, I'm a huge fan of the cube fun format. If you want to have some more context on what cube is, I'm going to have links in the description down below so that you can familiarize yourself with it if you haven't experienced cube yourself before. I think it's a fantastic way to have fun with friends in a different way to experience Pokemon. So today I'm going to be going over some of the new inclusions from Brilliant Stars that I have my eye on for a multitude of cubes. Starting with the supporter cards, usually these are ones that can be thrown into all sorts of different cubes because it doesn't really change the power level too much for the most part. And I think the three on the left here are very likely going to make it into a ton of cubes. Gloria being an additional means of just searching out multiple Pokemon. It's going directly to bench, so it's a kind of strong effect, not quite as strong as Collector, of course, and it also can be nice if there are going to be certain cubes which are going to introduce some rulebox style Pokemon. I know there are some cubes that are playing a couple multiple prize Pokemon, and there are some even playing Prism Star Pokemon to an extent, and Gloria is a way to sort of keep those balanced and less easily searchable, whereas it keeps the sort of usual lines of the one prizes open for some great search. And even if you're not playing Rulebox Pokemon, Gloria is going to be a great supporter that you can be adding into your cube. Roseanne's backup, the epitome of cube. I think this is like the new face of cube in my mind. That's going to be the supporter that instantly jumps out at me, because I think this is just such an awesome card for a format where typically you're drafting singletons. You're only having one copy of certain really important cards in your deck, be it Pokemon, be it a huge tool card that you've been able to maneuver. Maybe it's a stadium card that you can leverage for your type, or is important to your strategy for like damage, whether it's via status conditions or something similar to that effect, where it's having some spread style damage effects. This could be a really big deal. And energy doesn't just state basic energy, this could be special energy as well. So if you picked up one or two really powerful special energy, that Roseanne's backup can reload those back into the deck. And typically, especially the likes of special energy and stadium cards, these are very difficult to recover and reuse. I think we have like Lusamine for stadiums, and we have things like Special Charge, which is a really low priority card in the majority of cubes, and sometimes doesn't even make it into a lot of cubes, especially like faster high power level cubes. But Roseanne's backup fills so many avenues that it's just a really nice card to pick up even early in a draft, and then work your draft around the supporter to make it even stronger, where you can get multiple uses out of certain tool cards, certain stadiums, certain special energy. And it's going to be really awesome to play with. It is slow, it's low on the tempo front, so I think it's going to do far, far better in the mid to low power cubes, but I still think there's an argument for it in the sort of mid-high power cubes as well, and I'm certainly going to put it into a ton of my cubes. I think it's an awesome, awesome, really cool designed card, and fits this format perfectly. Next up, we have Cynthia's Aspiration, another great one for cube builders. Drawing up to 5 when you're in a panic isn't the worst situation for you, but seeing as though oftentimes there are plenty of single prize Pokemon in the cube formats, getting that full value of drawing up to 8 is going to be phenomenal. So I think Cynthia's Aspiration, a great cube include for a lot of people. Then we have a few sort of more questionable, interesting ones. We have the Team Yell's Cheer, which can recover a combination of supporters and Pokemon back into your deck. I actually think this is pretty strong as well. Sometimes it's really good to reload like just one supporter card if you're sort of building around this, and then you also get the benefit of getting a couple Pokemon back at the same time. I know that like Palpad can be really important for the likes of like Fire decks, for example, getting back your Blacksmith, getting back your Welder if it's in the cube, those sorts of things. If you have some disruption style supporters, getting those back with a Team Yell's Cheer would be really nice as well. Or even getting back like an N or a Judge or a Marnie effect, because they're so premium in draft typically, and you don't get to draft many of them. Having a Yell's Cheer, getting that back into the deck for later, whilst also getting some of your like line toppers back or whatever, is a really big deal. So I also think Team Yell's Cheer is a really nice inclusion for a number of cubes. Cafe Master is an interesting one. It allows you to have some interesting energy acceleration if you are playing multiple types of basic energy. I think it's going to be one of these cards that needs to be timed pretty well, seeing as though it has an end your turn effect. But it could be a means of getting lots of acceleration going via one supporter card. So pretty interesting. Energy acceleration in supporters is usually pretty good in cube, especially if it's a slower cube with some setup. The Cafe Master could be super interesting for getting multiple threats powered up. If you have any sort of energy manipulation effects, that could get even better for you. So yeah, kind of niche, but I could see it squeezing into some cubes and people actually finding it very strong. And again, could even be like a build-around style card if you get the right pieces alongside it. Then we have a couple type-specific supporters from this set. Sharon's Care is an Acerola effect, being able to pick a colorless Pokemon only back up into your hand if it has any damage counters on it. And I think if you're worried about having a supporter like Acerola that is universal and could lead to some awkward interactions, a Sharon's Care brings it back into a box that little bit, so you know exactly the potential that someone can use out of this card. I think it's mostly going to be helpful if there are going to be some attacking colorless lines, and colorless is one of these types where oftentimes they fill more the supporting category. Normally they're used for like their abilities and their setup usage and their overall utility. But if you do have some decent size attacking Pokemon, the Sharon's Care could be really nice here. And I think if you're concerned about a card like Acerola, the Sharon's Care could be a great starting point for you. See how strong it ends up and make it happen. Because there are some good colorless supporters now, with Sharon's Care being a defensive sort of option as well as the Winona. There certainly is reason to try and build like a full-on colorless deck and then have like splashes of other Pokemon, whatever gets drafted, into your list. So yeah, really interesting support. I'm kind of excited to see where like colorless goes in general with the option of Sharon's Care, because we've seen how things like Gardenia can really be an identifier for a grass type now as a class, as being like one of the best healing decks available sometimes, and a Sharon's Care could open that avenue for colorless potentially as well, and could really give you some interesting coming into play effects from some colorless Pokemon. So that's also one to keep an eye out for. And then Kindler, not a super strong supporter, I don't think, but could still be good enough in Fire. Oftentimes, if you are playing like Ninetales or Salazzle or even Delcatty, Fire oftentimes finds itself playing lots of physical energy, because you also tend towards supporters like Blacksmith. You have Fire Crystal sometimes, you have Welder, all these sorts of supporters available to you, that Fire naturally leads itself towards having that higher range of energy already in the deck, and having some tutoring is not bad, you know. So Deep Dig into the 7 cards, not too shabby, and can access cards that you couldn't normally just like tutor out with other usual effects. Like, it's not just looking for Pokemon, it's not just looking for energy, it could grab all sorts of things here. So very interesting card. I think can push Fire in an interesting direction as well. There's a big debate I'm going to have when talking about Magma Basin momentarily about where Fire should be, because I actually think Fire has the most powerful support available in general in Cube. And I think, yeah, it's going to be something I talk about with the Basin momentarily. But Kindler could be a nice, like, not too powerful way of supporting the Fire archetypes. Let's have a look at stadiums, tools, and special energy then. Starting off with Collapse Stadium. Really nice, I think. Just a generally strong card. Not so backbreaking to a number of archetypes that it's just going to win the game on the spot. And I think it's just a decent option. I think it's a much fairer option than Parallel as well. Parallel is one of these stadiums that I think is starting to be a card that I don't like seeing in a lot of cubes. I think that reduction of damage is backbreaking for low and mid power cubes. I think that bench reduction can also be really awkward in some big setup style cubes as well. So I've done very well in certain cubes just because I had a Parallel and sometimes could reuse it with the likes of Lusamine. Whereas Collapse Stadium, I think it'll give you an advantage and can be annoying in spots, and can still be that like pseudo heal option, removing easy prizes from the opponent option, but is far less just insta win against the opponent because it's only reducing to 4 bench. So I'd really like to see Collapse start coming in over Parallels, which has just more of a feels bad element to it. Then we have Magma Basin, and I think be very, very careful with Fire these days. If you are going to be squeaking Magma Basin into your cubes, I think we're getting to this tipping point with Fire where we actually need to start saying, okay, if I'm adding Basin, I probably need to take out some sort of other acceleration, because I think Fire just has way too much acceleration for it. I think over and over again, I will mostly see imbalanced cubes be in the fire department, because they naturally have the likes of Welder, the likes of Blacksmith available, and just naturally cards that get played in cubes like Versus Seeker, like Palpad, like Cynthia Caitlin, like Lusamine. Reloading energy acceleration effects is crazy strong. It gives you like such a ridiculous bounce back turn by turn that you can just maintain a chain of attackers very easily. And I think Basin would just compound that interest even more, where Fire will basically never miss a beat as soon as they start getting their acceleration online. Now, what I love about Basin is that you're damaging yourself, and I think this means that it's a fair means of acceleration in low-mid power, because the counters really matter, and you have to be very concerned about what you're Basining to, because you can put yourself into knockout range for a ton of attacks, especially if you're using the Basin multiple times onto one Pokemon. That could be a huge deal, and there's an actual consideration the entire game of like what that downside is and how it's going to affect your board state, and how easy it is for your opponent to knock out your stuff. So love this card in mid and low power, because that's where Blacksmith and Welder won't be found anyway. They're too strong cards, I would say. But when we're going into that sort of mid-power range, I'd start to look at like cutting the Welder, maybe even cut Blacksmith now, and just say that Fire has enough of an acceleration identity just from Basin and like other Stadium recursion, especially with Roseanne's backup now, as well as Lusamine. I think you could quite realistically still build around one Stadium card in this format. So I think, yeah, I'm very concerned about Fire and how easily people could misuse the Stadium card, because there's just such a glut of Fire acceleration now. And I would really like to start seeing Basin coming in instead of some of these supporters rather than in addition to. So that's my soapbox. Be aware of Basin. Love this card for mid and low power. Be afraid of it in sort of higher power, where the damage counters sort of mean less very often as a downside. And there's just so much like draw to get towards this card and try and get multiple effects out of it and just have a really strong amount of energy just all into one deck and never missing a beat even for high attack costs. So be very careful with your Fire stuff. Pot Helmet, interesting card. It could be like a universal reduction of 30, which is a very strong trainer card, an upgrade to Hard Charm, which is already like a questionably very strong card and has to be kept only really in like mid-high power level cubes. But also, just like I was saying with Gloria, it's going to be only for those non-V Pokemon. So it's trying to balance those out that little bit, where if you are having a world with non-rule boxes as well as rule boxes all in one cube, it's a way of keeping them powerful and actually making it relevant. And I actually think you could start seeing some of the like very early Black and White era EXs coming in to some cubes if you are seeing Pot Helmet as like maybe like a multiple copy of tool card now, and you support some single prize Pokemon, but then also have like big EXs in there. So it would be interesting to see that power struggle now that we have a card like this that can really have a divide between the rule boxes and the non-rule boxes. I think if more and more of that stuff comes out, like Path of the Peak as well, you could actually have this really interesting struggle between the single prize vanilla Pokemon and the rule boxes, which I think is cool. Double Turbo, huge tick from me. Just like Upper Energy, it's a DC with that caveat. And again, if you're going into like mid power, I feel kind of safe about this card, because a -20 is a big deal, a big hit to your damage. And when you're in that sort of like mid-high power, it feels like just an additional DCE. Obviously, be careful about double colorless. Like I was saying with Fire, ironically, this effect is really good. One attachment for 2 energy can be utilized by a ton of different cards, often in cube. And if someone gets just enough of those effects all into one deck, it could end up feeling quite unfair. So just monitor the amount of double colorless, triple acceleration, boost energies that you have all in your cube, because sometimes just adding one additional can tip certain archetypes over the edge in comparison, because it becomes an easier draft, or they just have that tipping point of too many available to them to be like fast or aggressive or have bounce back on their own end. But overall, really love these 4 cards. Think they're super interesting for cube. On to some helpful basics then. Manaphy as a much fairer means of protecting your bench compared to Mew, which is weird to say, right? Because Mew has less hit points than Manaphy, but Mew's early game damage is scary. Placing 3 counters around the board can really put people on the back foot, and Mew is very strong in the early game, actually, as an attacking threat. So turning a Mew into a Manaphy could be interesting. I know there's also Mr. Mime and stuff like that, so it's not like a big deal, but just a quick note there as an extra bench protector. If you like having those in your cube, feel free to add them in. And then we have some really interesting colorless stuff. I think Hawlucha, super interesting card actually, with that early game acceleration option, which is super interesting, but then also having Crosscut, which can give you some bounce back into some evolution matchups, and it makes it a really good opening Pokemon where it has an annoying hit points to sort of churn through for a number of early game attackers like stage 1 rush style decks, and Crosscut does a good amount of damage, especially into those early aggressive stage 1 rush style decks. So I do think this card on its own just completely changes the tempo of a game where you're happy to sit behind it and just use Appealing Pose as long as you have discard synergies for your energy cards and build a board behind it. But the first evolution that comes in to start dealing with this Hawlucha is probably taking a Crosscut unless they can one-shot it, which is then committing like their best attacker that they've built up, or probably waited even longer to get a stage 2, which means hopefully you've got a couple Appealing Poses off and built your own board. So I actually think this is low-key really, really nice card, and it's going to be an interesting interaction in the early game, especially in like mid-power. I think this is actually probably too good for low power because 30 for 1 is just crazy. Mid-high, this card sort of fits for me. Castform is also sort of in that mid-range. I think mid-low potentially is good enough. The draw 2 isn't like a big deal, but I actually really like Hurricane as like an early pressure option. This is kind of like a big basic in like low-mid power. And 30 moving energy back to one of your benched means that even if it's knocked out, it's only 1 energy that's being lost. So it's a great tempo card and can be used in those panic draw situations. So Castform, low-key, a big basic in the low-power format, so kind of like it there. Then Tornadus, looking at sort of back to that high-power range, certainly high power. It's a colorless Pokemon that can hit a vanilla 100. I love the vanilla 100 breakpoint because that's knocking out a ton of stage 1s, but not knocking out a ton of stage 2s. So it's in that sort of fair range where I think... yes, you can give it some damage modifiers here and there and make it very, very scary, but in general, it's like a big basic that also comes stitched with this ability that forces... Well, it's a repel effect, right? It forces the opponent's active back onto their bench, and they're obviously the one choosing the new active Pokemon. So it's got a great coming into play effect. It's the same effect we've seen on a previous Hawlucha, actually. But the thing about that Hawlucha is it basically does nothing after it's done that sudden cyclone ability, whereas this Tornadus... it does that ability, and then there's cream on top that it's not just a wasted board space at that point. It can end up coming into the fight by having this decent colorless attack cost. So anything that plays acceleration or energy manipulation, or again, if you've picked up some of those colorless attachment multiple energy effects, the Tornadus gets a lot of value. And you know me, I love a big basic, so I had to get one on here. And Tornadus seems like an excellent include now for high power cubes only, really. Onto some of the more popular evolution lines then, and the inclusions that we get from Brilliant Stars. We have an awesome Empoleon, and I personally have Empoleon in my regular evolution cube. Absolutely adore this evolution line as a cube card, and also Empoleon's my favorite Pokemon, so it's a no-brainer for me to look at this card with awe. And I actually like that this brings my Empoleon line specifically down a little bit in power level, because the Water Arrow attack is a 60 damage snipe, which is certainly good pressure and is dangerous and will find itself certainly useful, especially with that amount of hit points. But it's not so out of control. And I think right now my Empoleon's in that strange threshold of being like kind of probably the best evolution line in my cube right now. So I can take out some of the recall Empoleons, which are doing just far too much work right now in my cube, and have a combination of Diving Draw and this new Emergency Ascent Empoleon, which is amazing. So I'm really happy to see it. It turns Empoleon from just a straight aggro, like attack command deck, into this interesting split where you have some damage in the face, you have some sniping potential, and I think that's really interesting. Still having that textbook low energy attack cost, making it a real threat, and giving you a lot of space in your deck despite playing stage 2s, which I think is awesome. But on top of that, it has the awesome ability where it can just come back into play if you have no cards in hand. from your discard pile. And that means that this Empoleon could be drafted by anyone. It doesn't have to be the Empoleon player that ends up having this card. You could just build a deck, and at any point, if you've discarded this Empoleon, you can get your hand down to 0. You can just get this boop back into play. Then everyone has a sniping attacker. So it's kind of like almost a universal pick around the board. Really, really good card. So they will be naturally contested. If it comes towards the Empoleon player, great, but someone can still find a way to make this work, even if they're playing like Rainbow Energy or Raw Energy, that sort of thing. It gives you some panic card draw whilst being a sniping option. So, super interesting card. It's not limited to just the person playing Empoleon who would want this, I don't think. And yeah, it fits amazingly in my cube, so I'm stoked to see it. Onto Grotle. It has the ability allowing you to search your deck for any grass Pokemon, and I really like Grotle. I think the Torterra, by the way, just quick note, is probably too strong for any cube that I'm aware of. I think that card is just too good for cube right now. 190 hit points and a 1-prizer that does a 50x multiplier. We're not quite ready yet for cube. I think that card is crazy. But I think using Grotle to power up some of the Torterras that you see on screen is a little bit fairer, and I think Torterra is a really good mid-power cube line. It's obviously a starter evolution, so people like Torterra. Some people have it as a favorite Pokemon, and Forest Murmurs is an awesome power to actually build around and makes the line itself a really interesting playstyle where you can play from behind but have this huge benefit of having Gust for being behind and really being rewarded for being a slower, tankier, sort of expensive attack costing deck, because you can easily make that comeback when you have Forest Murmurs, especially in that mid to late game, when you can just pick off threats after you've knocked out the first 1 or 2 things in response to your opponent's early pressure. So I love the Grotle. I think it's going to be a great include for some mid-power Torterras, and really makes the line much more interesting and well-rounded as a whole, whereas I think previously it's kind of been behind the likes of Venusaur and behind the likes of like Sceptile even as a grass line, because they just have sort of more going for them. But I think this Grotle makes this overall line in general a lot more interesting, I think. Onto Wormadam and Mothim. This is a whole sort of thing, but really we have 3 Wormadams all having that 30 plus 10 for each of your Pokemon in the discard pile attack for 2 colorless energies. And I think this is a really, really cool line and could actually open up an archetype for similar to how we see evolutions in a ton of cubes. I could easily see there being just the general Wormadam Mothim like mini package where there's like 8 Burmies and like 2 of each Wormadam and a couple Mothim. You know, I could see that just being a thing in cubes now because it fits a really nice, I think, high power niche, because 30 plus 10 is like a very decent multiplier but isn't going to come out the gates crazy fast. There's a couple old Wormadams which are also kind of interesting, where they offer some spread, they offer some status, and they offer some early tempo in the form of the fighting type, which is kind of what fighting's already trying to do very well. So I really like splashing some of the new and the old together. You could just be a full Burmy deck, you know. Some of the Burmies have great abilities, some have some early evolution style effects. The ones I put on screen have some self-acceleration that can make these Wormadams that little bit cheaper to attack with, and again work from the discard pile, so really help you build towards a heavy discarding deck, really benefit that approach. So I think Wormadam's super interesting, and I can start seeing it being the contender to evolutions, actually, which is kind of bold. And I think something that would be really fun is if someone makes a 2-player Wormadam Mothim cube. I think it could be super interesting, where both players are sort of always constantly looking at not only their hands, not only the board state, but also the discards pile. And, you know, if knockouts or whatever can put your opponent into a threshold where they can respond with a knockout or whatever, and how many discards away they are from a KO. All of that stuff I think would be super interesting to look at. So yeah, the new Mothim, incidentally, is also pretty high power, coming into play effect for that 120, a lot of tempo. So be careful about this card. 100 hit point free retreat Pokemon as well. There's a lot to like about that. So pretty strictly in the high power category. And if you are making Wormadam Cube, that Mothim looks awesome. So try out Wormadam Cube. I want to see it. Onto Claydol, one of the most sort of loved stage 1s of all time is Cosmic Power Claydol. And we're getting to a point where there's probably enough attacking Claydols where this fits a high power cube, not just with cosmic power. You can actually have realistically like a 6/4 line of Claydol now, where you have a couple cosmic power maybe, and then you have this new Claydol which can deal a huge amount of damage if you've matched bench sizes, as well as the other Claydol on screen here, where you can put some things into 60 hit point range, which are a couple interesting attackers actually. And Cosmic Power, for me, only really belongs in higher power cubes. I think it's way too much value to be in mid power and low power cubes. It's just way better draw than anyone else ever can have. So I like that we're getting some aggressive attacking Claydols that can make someone actually just build a full Claydol deck, you know, and gives people a reason to actually take some Baltoys like speculatively, or like even have a thicker line of the Claydol being drafted, rather than just like as soon as you see your one Baltoy, you take it just in case you hit your Claydol, and then you're just like happy with a 1/1 line because Cosmic Power is broken. This could make people be incentivized to go into a full Claydol package. I don't know if it'll actually happen, but we're starting to get the pieces come together for Claydol being an actual, like, in its own right, worthwhile stage 1. So kind of interesting. Onto Dusknoir, super interesting stage 2. Again, you got to be careful with Dusknoir. There's some super scary ones out there. I'm always a little bit concerned about moving damage counters around and all that sort of thing. So be aware of Dusknoir, be aware of how powerful some of its effects are. But I think this one, again, the fact that it just has a vanilla 120, it's not exciting, it's not thrilling, but we know exactly where we're coming in at, and that's the number where I want to be, where you're missing high power level stage 2s, you're knocking out stage 1s, which is really nice, and you have the ability on top, which is helping you move special energies around. We know that Psychic has a ton of interesting special energy at its disposal, like Mystery Energy can help you retreat pretty easily. You have Horror Psychic Energy, you have a ton of things here which could be really useful for you. Not least the fact that you could just play ton of other special energy. It doesn't have to be the psychics. So yeah, the Dusknoir could be super interesting. You could have some interesting healing cards like Max Pot pretty happily as well with this ability, and it works well with a few of the other Dusknoirs as well. Super interesting evolution line, and I think this is a really amazing stage 2 option if you are in that high power level psychic range. Obviously the hit points we're getting to now means a lot of the time I'm talking about high power cube, which isn't for everyone, right? But just based on the vanilla stats of most of these cards, it's inevitable that we're mostly talking about the higher power side here. Starmie, however, could be interesting as a mid-power option. The 1 for 60 is very scary. This is like a Donphan Prime, right? With free retreat. So a little bit scary, and can also punish energies being flooded onto one target with that psychic attack. But again, we're getting to that point where Starmie's Space Beacon makes it super tempting for people to want to have in their cube. It can combine with a ton of other abilities, and people love seeing Starmie. But now we're starting to get the likes of Strange Wave, and now this new Power Gem Starmie. We have a couple really nice early tempo attacking Starmies in their own rights, and it has the identity of a ton of free retreat in here as well. Low energy, high tempo damage that can be doing more for you as well as you move into that mid to late game. If you want to risk having a multi-shot Starmie in your cube alongside Strange Wave, it could be, you know, a wombo combo, you know, as long as you're careful with the other water acceleration in the cube and keep it, you know, to just the likes of Aqua Patch and not have, you know, like the Blastoises and all that other stuff in here. You can keep multi-shot style down to like a compact level of only 1 or 2 big turns in a game, where it's still going to feel impactful and strong, but it's not going to feel like you can never beat a Starmie player, right? Because you have to be very conservative with spread that can be targeted so flexibly here. But yeah, I really like a combination of like Strange Wave, multi-shot, Space Beacon, and the new Power Gem. I think that's just like 4 Starmies ticking lots of boxes, being interesting for a number of archetypes, offering some early tempo and not just being able to like run away with the game like sometimes Donphan Prime can do, because he's just so big, whereas the 90 hit points on Starmie isn't so big that it's unsurmountable, even though there's a lot of pressure coming at the opponent quickly with that Power Gem. So I do really like this card, very interesting. Starmie's a popular evolution line, great stage 1 here as well. Lucario. I almost didn't talk about this Lucario because I feel like it's probably way too strong, self-accelerating with a 60x multiplier. However, you are discarding all of those energies attached to yourself at least. But Lucario is already a really, really good high power stage 1. The Hurricane Kick Lucario crazy late game beat stick stance on both the level X and the more modern ones from the Sword and Shield sets, sorry, the Sun and Moon sets, are very scary, right? So be careful about Lucario. I think realistically, I think even though it's stronger in Mutant because anything can evolve and take advantage of that acceleration, I think it's safer in Mutant simply because everything else is stronger in Mutant, and it's not like unheard of to have things that self-accelerate. So I think I put this on here just because Lucario is a popular evolution line, but I'm not going to be putting it in my cube, even though I have Lucario. I just think it's far too strong of a card in cube. But if you're playing a higher power level, feel free to go for this Lucario. Just be very aware of it. It's instantly on the monitor list for being a potential threat that has to come straight back out of the cube, especially if you're combining it with stance stuff. Onto a Minccino. This is just a pretty easy one here. Just like we're seeing in Standard, actually, how much Make-Do loves to see this Call for Family effect. Anyone playing Minccino currently in their cubes has a new upgrade high priority Minccino that they can simply add. Based on your power level, add 1, 2, 3 copies, however many you want, to be honest. But yeah, awesome upgrade for Minccino, which is another popular engine. Onto some more Mutant Considerations. The reason why I put these as Mutant Considerations instead of just like popular evolution lines is that they don't really have enough established to be their own evolution lines, or at least even though there are cards like Garchomp that's super interesting, Klinklang that's super interesting, I don't think they fit a role of either they don't fit within the power level of any cube right now, or they conflict with the power level of the other evolution lines, so they're probably just going to be standalone cards. So Floatzel is a great way to recover some item cards. Super interesting early game. Has 2 energy attack for 60. Pretty good for cube, I would say. For mutants, Klinklang, giving some reduction. Its attack is scary, but it's coin flip based, so I don't feel too bad about it, especially because it's a high energy attack cost. You'd expect in mutant, sort of 3-4 energy attack cost will be knocking things out reliably, so I don't think it's too shabby. Lipard, amazing for cube, especially mutant. You love seeing the extra draw. And it's great for the dark type in general, which I don't think is like the most pushed type unless you go crazy with like energy acceleration. So yeah, I think Lipard pretty good include here. Garchomp feels just too strong for regular cubes. The 160 damage, being able to knock out basically every stage 2 for 2 energy on top of having this ability is just really, really strong. We've seen stance on Lucario, but oftentimes that's followed up by attacks that aren't just insta-KOing stage 2s, whereas this Garchomp certainly is. So I would be afraid of it in a standard evolution. In Mutant, there's so much crazy stuff going on, you could consider it, but I would still think it's probably on that higher end. And Bibarel, I don't think there's enough interesting Bibarel for it to start overtaking some of the interesting colourless stage ones that we have the option to play right now. But I do certainly love it as another ability option for that colourless type, which is always priority in Mutant to an extent, because you can feel pretty safe that you're going to get some support colourless Pokemon just because of how much of them are naturally helpful as basics. So yeah, always pretty nice to pick up these colourless stage 1 lines because they give your early game basics a lot of utility into that mid game. Finally, we'll end on some reprints. Just important to know if you are someone that likes to play singleton but have different artworks of cards. I always like to mention this because it's something that I sometimes do, and being able to squeeze in an extra Ultra Ball never is a bad thing. If you love those draw 3 effects, you get Barry and Gallifrends. Huge, great news for you guys. If you want to have more draw 3s, these are available to you. And there's an additional print of Boss's Orders, now with Cyrus version, if you want to have that in your cube as an extra gusting effect. And there's also an additional research, so if you want to add some new artworks or just have extra quantities of these certain effects in the cube, feel free to grab some of these as well from Brilliant Stars. So that's it, guys. Hope you did enjoy my ramble. As you know, I love cube. Some of these ones specifically are very cool for my cubes as well, so I'm super excited to make some updates to my IRL ones in person, as well as some of my online cubes as well. If you're unfamiliar with Cube but have sat through all of this, good on you. You can go ahead and check out Cube Koga, a website dedicated to Cube. It has a ton of great stuff on there. There's an events page as well that follows the Cube League that we have in Discord. There's everyone's cubes basically on there, where you can look in detail at these sorts of cards. That has a huge card catalog going on. You can filter in all sorts of different ways, including typing in Omnipoke on the search, and you'll see all of my cubes there, and the full breakdown of the rule sets and everything else. And there's also a great content tab to check out some of the other great cube content out there that can get you down the rabbit hole, because it certainly is one. I hope you guys did enjoy today's video, and I'll be back tomorrow with another one. Cheers.